Bien, pues puede creerme, Montag. No hay nada en ellos. Los libros no dicen nada.
You know what we're here for. Lay some treats on us.
Como acabaram de ouvir.
Sou eu quem o manda fazer.
Bueno, Kaixo, Arratsalde, buenas tardes, Egunon, buenos días, good morning. Depende de dónde os estéis conectando. Nada, un día más estamos aquí en nuestra habitación propia compartida con Sony. Mil gracias a todas las personas que habéis compartido la actividad estos días y a todas aquellas que nos estáis atendiendo, acompañando en esta habitación propia compartida, en esta actividad que se enmarca dentro del Festival Radical Made, de la Feria de Barcelona Literal, la Feria de Libros y de Ideas Radicales, que han querido hacer este mes de mayo radical, este Radical May, que agradecemos mucho, porque nos brinda la oportunidad de dar voz a algunas de nuestras autoras más radicales. Ayer nos acompañó Donna Haraway y hoy tenemos con nosotras a Charlene Carruthers. Está aquí con nosotras, muy cerca pero muy lejos, en su habitación conectada a la nuestra, junto con Arrate Hidalgo. Sin más, como digo, agradecer sobre todo a Radical Made el darnos esta oportunidad de presentar el libro Sin concesiones, Preceptos negros, queer y feministas para movimientos radicales. Este libro que hemos tenido la suerte de publicar en 2019 y que hoy tenemos la suerte de presentaros y de compartiros. La charla va a ser íntegramente en inglés. Por eso ahora yo voy a cambiar un momento al inglés para presentar a mis compañeras. The author, Charlene Carruthers, that has spent over a decade developing leaders as an effective strategy, community organizer and educator. She's a Black lesbian feminist activist, and she has found the national director. She was the founding national director of the VAP 100, a prominent organization of young activists in the movement for Black liberation. She's going to talk today, now in a minute, with the translator of her latest book, with the editor and cultural critic Arrate Hidalgo, a close friend too, and the translator of I'm saying of this book. If you want, as public, you have the chance of making questions. You can ask questions using the hashtag Carruthers Consoni. The hashtag that you see here is Carruthers Consoni. And you can do it in Twitter, in Facebook, and on YouTube. And we are going to select some of the questions, and then we are going to make to her. So please feel free of making questions. And that's all. I want to just add that if you want the book, if you don't have this book, this amazing book, you can have it on our website. Puedes adquirir este libro Sin concesiones de Charlene Carruthers en ebook o en papel en nuestra web de Consoni, en consoni.org, o en tu librería favorita. Puedes conseguir Sin concesiones en todostuslibros.com o en libelista.com. Sin más, no tengo mucho más que decir, solamente os quiero recordar que por favor no dejemos de comprar libros en nuestras editoriales y librerías preferidas. Let's not stop buying books from our favorite publishers and bookstores. Please, we need you, and thank you very much, all of you, for being here, and thank you very much, especially to Charlene and Arrate for joining us today. Thank you.
There we go. Hi. Welcome to this space. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. It's so exciting to see you finally.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm excited.
Yes. So first off, to introduce you to potential readers and people who might not know so much about you, I have a short bio. So I will present you as the way you present yourself, as a Black queer feminist, community organizer and writer with over 15 years of experience in racial justice, feminist and youth leadership, development movement work. Born and raised on the south side of Chicago, where she currently resides and continues to lead and partake in social justice movements. She is the founding national director of BYP 100, as Maud just said, which is a US base of activist member-led organization of Black 18 to 35-year-olds dedicated to creating justice and freedom for all Black people. She's also the founder and executive director of the Chicago Center for Leadership and Transformation, has led grassroots and digital strategy campaigns for US organizations, as well as being part of solidarity campaigns between Black and Palestinian liberation movement. And of course, she is the author of best-selling book, Unapologetic, a Black, queer, and feminist mandate for radical movements, which I recently had the total pleasure to translate into Spanish for Consone. And this is why we're here today. So hi again. And I wanted to say congratulations on all the work you've done to this date, and wishing you strength for all the work, obviously, left to do in light of the most recent news coming from Minneapolis, for instance. So how are you doing? How are the people in the field, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, thank you. Thank you for all your work and like care in translating Unapologetic. Even choosing the title was a community effort and landing on sin concesiones. I'm very happy that we landed there. And for me, it was important to be able to convey the feeling of Unapologetic, no matter what language the book was actually translated into. And so thank you for that. And the other thing that I want to lean into is obviously the cover of the Spanish language version is just as important to me as the English language version, because they're deeply connected to Black people. The Spanish language version, of course, has an image gifted to us by Zeneli Muholi from South Africa. And the English language version is actually a play on quilting from Black women in Alabama, I believe. And so in thinking about this moment that we're in right now, where there are people on the ground in Minneapolis, there are people on the ground in Louisville, Kentucky, there are people on the ground in Indianapolis right now contending with policing and the impact of policing in Black and brown neighborhoods in this country. And it's hard, seeing the images, particularly as one of the many people who also participated in a number of rebellions and uprisings here in the U.S. in the past several years. From Ferguson, I was briefly in Ferguson. I was in the Baltimore uprising, in Charlotte, just in Chicago, a lot of places. And my heart and my love and also care and concern goes out to everyone. And many of the people on the ground in Minneapolis are my friends and my loved ones right now. And they're also amazing Black organizers working on the ground in that city, not just today or this week. And in addition to, fighting for justice for Mr. Floyd, who was killed, may he rest, and his memory be a blessing to all. These are people who organize every single day on the behalf of Black liberation. So my deep appreciation goes out to them.
Yeah, I think that the fact that the work has been done for a long time and it's just a continuation of it will come up more times. Let's try and make the most of this time we have to create a pocket of radical thought, maybe, hopefully, a communication link to your Spanish readers, actually. So first off, I wanted to ask you actually what has been next for you after finishing the book, and since you transitioned out of BYP 100 and currently, so tell us what you've been involved in terms of your activist life, your personal journey.
You know, Arate, I actually am in a lot less trouble these days, or even up a lot less trouble these days than I used to. I tell people, like, I don't really do that. I don't do as much. Well, that could change quickly given the realities here in Chicago, for sure. Unapologetic was published in August of 2018. The English language version, and it was published in hardcover at that time. And since then, I've been on a wild journey across the US primarily in talking about not just the book, but talking about the Black organizing landscape in this country and connecting with Black organizing that happens all over the world. Because we know that anti-Blackness is a global reality. We know that white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, all of these things are global realities and are connected in many ways. And so for me, since Unapologetic has come out, I've leaned more into doing facilitation, movement education, even dipping into national electoral politics in our recent Democratic presidential primary, and choosing to support a candidate very actively for the first time in a long time that I can remember for myself. And so I've been stretching and flexing and figuring out what it means for me to be involved in Black liberation work in this moment. In the fall, I'm actually going back to school to pursue my PhD in African American Studies because
Congrats.
I love learning, and I like the long pursuit of knowledge is important to me. And it's a part of my practice as a Black person who's concerned about Black liberation and about collective liberation at large. So I've been asking myself a lot of questions. I've been in conversation and practice with other people, and even the last thing I'll say is deepening my creative work and my work as my practice as a cultural worker. I'm working on a novel right now, and also writing poetry these days. So
interesting.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And you actually kind of gave way to my next question, which was actually what kind of feedback have you got from other activists in the US and even around the world? Do you know of any campaigns that might have been inspired by the book, or, you know?
That's a great question. I'm really fortunate to have friends and comrades who live all over the world, and people in particular. I've been in regular relationship with comrades in South Africa, and I've just been astounded at their interest in the book in the first place, because South Africa was so formative for me as a person, as an activist, as an organizer. I traveled to South Africa when I was 18 years old in 2004, so you can do the calculations on how old I am today. And it changed my entire worldview. And I was in Canada sometime last year, and they're using the book, specifically the 5 questions chapter, that goes through a series of questions that I think that all organizers and activists and people who are concerned with collective liberation should ask themselves. And those questions are: who am I? Who are my people? What do we want? What are we building? And are we ready to win? And people are using that in their campaign work. Unapologetic or sin concesiones is also being used in universities all over the place, dozens of places. And it's still astounding to me. Like, it doesn't get normal for me to hear that people are using this book in their day-to-day lives, in their learning, in their organizing. And it is absolutely full of stories and inspiration and knowledge from people besides me. And that actually, interestingly enough, when I was drafting the book, one of the things that I was told early on was like, hey, we know you know what other people have said, but we want to hear more of what you think. And so it's been a wonderful journey. And it was also the first time in a long time where I got to talk about ideas from my perspective in a much different way, and hold or own them in a different way. And I've appreciated it.
Good. And what about the translation? How did you feel when you found out that it was being translated? Like, what's the value of it being translated for you?
My goodness. It was one of my priorities before the book was even published.
Oh yeah?
In English. Oh yeah. I was like, I spoke with my literary agent very early on and said, I want this translated into Spanish.
All right.
I grew up in the Back of the Arts neighborhood here in Chicago, which when I was growing up, it was predominantly Mexican American and Black, and with still a sizable community of Polish Americans as well. And so most of the people on my block spoke Spanish and spoke English. And if I was going to the corner store, the people who worked there spoke Spanish. My next door neighbors owned the restaurant around the corner. They spoke Spanish until the second grade. All my classmates, most of my classmates spoke Spanish and English. And in my organizing work, multiple languages have always been present. And in addition to Latinx people who aren't Black folks who are Latinx and speak Spanish have always been present in my work and in community with them. And so it's important to me for Black liberation. But also the work that was it was stalled given the pandemic. We're actually going to launch a program called the Islanda Robeson program with the Chicago Center that focuses on language education for Black activists and organizers who primarily speak English. And so to learn the first language that we were going to start with, or we are going to start with as soon as we can, is Spanish, and that will be expanded beyond Spanish. So it was deeply important to me. I mean, the first direct action, actually the first protest I ever attended on my college campus was for the DREAM Act in like 2003 or 2004 or something like that. And we know that immigration policy and migrant rights does not only impact people who are Spanish speaking, but in the US, the story has overwhelmingly been a story that's left out Black people. So in my earliest experiences, like, it was primarily a story that, and I understand on many levels why that story was told in the way that it was told. Many of the people I was working with, they were Spanish speaking.
Right.
And that was my first time. I was like 18. It was all around that time. The first direct action I ever attended was about ending deportations, and it was led by Latinx organizations here in Chicago. And so it's just been a part of my thing. I'm like, the people I work with speak many languages, and a lot of people speak Spanish. And so this book is about movement building. It's about Black liberation, including Black folks who are primarily Spanish speaking across the world, frankly, particularly in the Western Hemisphere. I had one comrade I met in Brazil, and she's from Colombia, and she's Black and she's Colombian, and she was like, I'm not reading this book until it's in Spanish. She can read English, but she said, I'm not reading it until it's in Spanish. And
well,
so
there you go.
That was part of my charge. So I'm like, well, I get it. So let me make sure this happens.
There it is. I mean, it only makes sense to reflect reality, right?
Yes.
And that's one of the many reasons why translation is and can be activism.
Absolutely.
So on the topic of international relations and international attention, I think it's really important how in Unapologetic you bring your learning from experiences from outside the US, from visiting Ghana, even reading about the Haitian Revolution, for instance, and much more. And all of this was vital to spark your knowledge of the Black radical imagination and tradition, which you are now building on. And in the opposite direction, how do you feel about the influence of US activism and thought on the way other activisms around the world are being formed?
I think it's so complicated. I've been in conversations about the influence of activism and movements here in the US and how they, particularly conversations about feminism,
Right.
and how much space it can take up. What I think is important in those conversations is to be real clear about which feminisms we're talking about here. Because I found, and not that all Black feminisms are radical, they're not all radical, but I found radical Black feminists being like couched right alongside like white feminists and non-liberatory feminism and saying all like Western feminism is the problem. And I take issue with that a lot of times. I really do. I'm like, y'all, the radical Black feminism that I prescribe to is highly critical of colonialism, capitalism, imperialism, militarism, occupations, all of those things, and not just critical of, but actively working towards dismantling them. But again, I recognize that not all Black feminisms are radical at all. And I also, I know that there's a history of what do I say, cross-national work or international work within Black feminisms, be it the Third World Women's Alliance, many organizations and efforts. And these things don't live in a vacuum. Just by virtue of being in the US, the process of getting a book published is different than other places. Our culture, our cinema, our art is like everywhere. The music is everywhere. I do think there's a high level of cultural imperialism that happens, and that our activism and our movements are not exempt from that. And so I think it's important to be very intentional, especially when we travel or when we gather and we have people from multiple places around the world, to not try to say everything is the same, or because this thing happened here, oh, it's just like here. I remember having that experience in Palestine, where the first couple of days that we were there, I even noted myself saying, oh, this is like this, or this is like that. And then having to make a shift to say, no, it's not about saying this is just like this or this, but to really name the connections across. And it is also difficult in conversations and organizing internationally because of the amount of money that we oftentimes have in the US compared to other places. And even though Black organizing in the US for the past several decades has been divested from, we don't get anywhere nearly as much money as other industry or other sectors get in the US, we still get a lot more money than a lot of other places around the world. And we're in a moment where our movements aren't being funded by like allied, like nation states. They're being funded by philanthropy and private donations or individual donations. Mm-hmm. And so I just think people from the US and particularly have to be intentional when we are doing work internationally, and being real clear that we shouldn't be going around the world teaching other people how to do anything. In fact, there's a lot that we can learn, so much that we can learn from people who are doing radical work across the world. Right.
Well, at the same time, always remembering that, as you said before, like white supremacy is a global thing. Like it's Absolutely. Not something, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So about exporting other things, I have this word that we're saying a lot these days, with his intersectionality, mm-hmm. coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. Mm-hmm. And I know that you have feelings about it, and they're in the book.
You don't get me in trouble.
They're in this book. You can access the feelings here. But I was wondering, like, do you think that it has changed with time? How do you feel about the way it's being used? I will go there and say how it's being co-opted. How has it influenced your practice? And does it relate at all to the fact that throughout Unapologetic you use the term Black queer feminist lens to mm-hmm. describe the radical practice that you propose?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I think a couple of things that you named. Kimberly Crenshaw is the person who created the intersectionality as a framework, and the word and the theory as a framework to how you think about the ways in which Black women experience multiple systems of oppression, mm-hmm. being both Black or systems of oppression along the lines of race and gender is some of the roots of intersectionality, right? And we know that since then, it has expanded to mean many, many more things. And I think it's important that we situate, and I talk about in the book, I think I talk about this in the book, intersectionality within a lineage of Black feminist thinking and doing, be it interlocking oppressions from the Combahee River Collective, be it triple oppressions, thinking about Claudia Jones's work, double jeopardy from this Beale. It sits within a lineage or a legacy. And Black queer feminism and the Black queer feminist lens absolutely sits within that lineage and that legacy as well. And I talk in the book, I say, I don't know when we started using Black queer feminist lens in BYP 100, because I actually don't know exactly when. But then I learned that there were specific people, including Fresco Steves, Asha Ransby Sporn, and Charity Tolliver, who were some of the earliest people to talk about it and maybe even before the organization. I don't know all the timeline, but I didn't come up with the phrase, and I don't want anybody saying that I came up with the Black queer feminist lens phrase.
Let that be known.
Yeah, I did not do that. What I did do is forward a definition for it and how I understand the Black queer feminist lens as both a practice and a theory that can be used in Black organizing towards our collective liberation. That is rooted in radical Black feminist and Black queer traditions of movement building. One that believes in self-determination and also collective and community care. One that is abolitionist, believing that the prison industrial complex as it exists in the United States and its tentacles, frankly, that exist around the world should be abolished. And that within this work, it's like, so I have a pair of glasses here, and I usually use the glasses like to explain what we mean by a Black queer feminist lens. Right. So just like any pair of glasses or any lens, they change the way that you see things or that you experience things. So these are actually like blue light blocker glasses. Imagine if we had like some white supremacy and patriarchy capitalism. Blocking glasses, that'd be nice. But the Black queer feminist lens is something that you apply to the work that you do. It's saying who's here, who's not, what stories are being told, what are not. Are we building collective power? Are we not? Are we leaning into radical Black feminism? Are we not? All these things, it's like, how do we apply this set of lenses to our work? And it's complementary to intersectionality in more ways than one. Intersectionality is about saying, let me look at how people are experiencing things holistically and not to flatten people and say, you're just this, your experiences are just this. Because when we do that, we actually are unable to see people. We are unable to tell a complete story. In my view, when we tell incomplete stories, we then get incomplete solutions. And so intersectionality gives us an offer and an invitation to look at people and systems and institutions in holistic ways so that we can come up with holistic solutions. And the Black queer feminist lens allows us to look at how we do our organizing work, right? How we are with each other, and how we lean into the things that came before us, how we build on things from there towards collective liberation.
Well, thanks for that. So moving on to the term activism and what an activist is, because to most people, I feel like it looks like a very specific kind of activity or even a job. So how would you describe an activist? And would you say, what would you say to people who want to be activists but don't see themselves, or they don't see themselves putting their body out there in the middle of the protest, for instance?
Oh, yeah. So I always start by saying that activism is actually not value loyal. You can be an activist with any set of values. Activism is not inherently radical. It can absolutely be liberal. It can be conservative. It can be regressive. All of those things. And activism, in its most basic form, is about taking action based on your values in public, either by yourself or with other people. And you don't have, and it's important that not all activists are necessarily organizers or people who are doing the work of working on like regularly on campaigns, helping to develop leaders and leadership, developing strategy, all those things. You can be an activist literally from your keyboard. You can be an activist in your neighborhood. You can be an activist within your faith institution, within your educational system. All of those things. It's all about like what you believe in and what you do to exercise that. I always talk about Beyonce and Beyonce. I love Beyonce. I love Beyonce Knowles Carter. And she says, you know, feminism is about, I can't remember the quote anymore, but it's like about believing that women should be equal or something like that. She has it in the song, or it could be Chimamanda who said it's from that quote. I can't remember now. But feminism is not just about what you think. It's not just about believing that we should all be equal or that we should all have equal rights. It is about what you do in order to create that world. Right. And you do not have to put your body out on the streets in order to do that. And people who say, or people who like either explicitly or implicitly indicate that in order to be a real activist, you have to be out in the streets. Not only is that ableist, it's just very limiting. It's extremely limiting. Because our movement work, yes, it's on the streets. It is also in your homes. It's in the institutions that you belong to. It's if you write, who make calls, do art, write poetry, write stories, engaging people around your values. And I just don't believe that there's one way to be involved in movement building. The kind of movement building I'm interested in is radical work that is about the collective liberation of all oppressed people. That is what I'm interested in. And also figuring out how we can be in right relationship with each other and everything that is on the land and the land that we live on. So yeah, I think we put too much weight into the title of activist, frankly. And like, you're not inherently good because you do radical activism or inherently right or whatever words we want to use to qualify it. And you know, and you don't even have to make any commitments to other people to be an activist. Frankly, do I think you should? Sure, but that's not always.
And it's undeniable that for activists, Unapologetic is like a wealth of information. Like really practical, not necessarily like from the perspective of like a list of techniques, but also like it gives you almost permission to actually feel that it's okay to be tired, to be overwhelmed, to feel grief, right? And that is something that also people who aren't activists can feel in very similar contexts. So what are the main ideas that you would hope non-activists to take from this book?
Yeah, I think it's for people who are not activists, what I would love for you to take from this book is to ask, what is it that you care about? What is it that makes you uncomfortable about the world that we live in? And to be agitated into doing something, like something different than what you did the day before. If that's speaking up, if it's joining an organization, if it's donating your time and your money to causes that matter to you. I want people to be more curious after a while reading this book. Ask more questions. Don't accept like the same stories that you've always been told about you, about the country you live in. And particularly because this book is very concerned with dismantling multiple systems of oppression, including anti-Blackness, that given that absolutely anti-Blackness is a global reality, is that to interrogate how anti-Blackness shows up in the place that you live in. I don't know a ton about Spain. I don't know a ton about it. I can't imagine that, Black people in Spain are just doing all good. Like I don't believe it.
Well, there are many white Spanish people who will tell you that they are, but of course, you know.
Yeah, I can't believe that. And it's not because I'm like, I just, you know, am jaded, but I just understand these things as, I mean, capitalism, like if we can have a conversation about capitalism, you cannot, if we want to rap about capitalism, there's no way to talk about capitalism in a way that is race neutral. We cannot. And, you know, the way I understand, I generally will now talk about it as racial capitalism or racialized capitalism. Like we can go all day and talk about how Spain built its wealth. And, you know, and we can't talk about how Spain built its wealth without talking about chattel slavery and about talking about anti-Blackness and race and all of those things. So I don't believe that just disappeared, you know, all of a sudden. So those are some of the things I want people to take away from. And I guess the last thing that I'll add is, in addition to being curious, is like, just don't even just take my word for it. Like there are other people and other things that I hope people explore.
Yeah, plenty of references to go searching. Yeah, I mean, definitely Spain, like we know how Spain built its wealth and also how it's still building it. And of course, in this context, I think that we can't not mention the pandemic.
Yes.
Not only because it's part of our everyday, but also specifically because of the tremendous inequality that, once again, it has demonstrated all over. So in Spain, for instance, in terms of like migrant workers, women workers, Black workers taking a great toll. And in the US, how Black workers and workers of color have massively lost their jobs, if not their lives, compared to the white population. So I wanted to ask you about your current work. Has it been affected by it? Have your priorities shifted? Have they been reinforced?
So what's happening in the US right now didn't have to happen. It's like the way it's happening. We've lost nearly, I don't know if the number has touched or reached 100,000 people, but we're near that or at that right now. And it did not have to happen. And what we are witnessing and experiencing, not just witnessing, also experiencing, like I've had a family member pass away from complications of COVID-19.
Sorry.
Thank you. And that happened recently. And we are witnessing and experiencing that in Black communities, in Indigenous and Native communities here in the US, and also in Brown communities across the US. And it has everything to do with decisions that were made in the White House and by the President of the United States, decisions made by many governors and mayors across this country as well. And not just in this particular moment, but the decisions that have been made for decades in this country to divest from our communities, particularly divesting from Black communities. I mean, this goes back to chattel slavery here. One of the counties hit hardest in the state of Georgia was also a site of chattel slavery and a site of sharecropping, which is like a form of debt peonage for Black farmers in post-emancipation here in the or the ending of chattel slavery in the United States in Dougherty County. And so like that's happening today. And then we also look at like what it means for Native communities who continue to struggle with land sovereignty, who are still living in a colonial state and an imperialist state. And so, and while being told that their lands still are not sovereign in this particular moment. And so all these things are connected. And my personal work has absolutely shifted. We rely heavily on in-person training and in-person conversations. And also, in addition to that, like it's just slowed down significantly. My work has slowed down significantly. And not just because we can't be in person, but also just personally, like not having the energy and dealing with like the new reality that we are in right now, the place that we are in right now, and figuring out what it means for me as a Black person, as a Black woman, as a Black woman living in Chicago, which has some of the highest rates in the country, actually living in one of the hardest hit neighborhoods in Chicago as well. It's just like, it's, you know, filled with anxiety and fear and waves of depression. Like all of that is really, really real in all of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's been very, I think that most of us to different degrees have felt like just basically the time stopped, or like the future already arrived and there we are, and suddenly there's nothing ahead and you don't quite know what to do.
Right.
But do you think that because of the way that like your work has been affected and everything, your life overall, do you feel like we are at a time at which we should maybe consider different ways of looking at say digital technologies and how they can be a tool for everyone, including the oppressors, right? I mean, and not only digital technology, because something really interesting that you said in an interview with Piccara magazine, which was the fact that, you know, people have colonized continents without phones, and enslaved people organized revolts without phones. So with what with mass surveillance online and offline, among many other things, do we have to look back to non-internet based organizing and ways of thinking? Can we learn from past strategies and apply that learning right now?
I think it's yes and. You know, I think there are many ways. First of all, I totally believe that the internet, the telephone system, electricity, all these things should be within the public domain. They should not be privately owned.
Right.
And they should be well managed. So those are all, like, the internet should absolutely access quality and regular access to the internet should be considered a human right. And it should not be controlled by the state or any corporation, period, without qualification. And given that that's not our reality yet, we should do what our people have always done. And there have always been, you know, various technologies that existed, be it the drum, like that was a technology. Communicating through drum is technology. The songs that people would sing, particularly enslaved Africans would sing to send messages, those are technologies. And it's like, how do we pass message through sound, through music, through art, be it art that we wear on our bodies, or there was a campaign that people, including an organizer here, Nalini Stamp of the Working Families Party, she was one of the people who led an effort for folks to like actually put a colored signal outside of their home based on what they needed, to know what they needed at home. So I think that it's, yes, we should look outside of electronic or digital technologies, and that we should also, when we're talking about, you know, seizing the means of production, we should be seizing the means of communication as well, between people, because that is one way that we know that the state and corporations, which are entangled in so many ways, surveil and control our lives.
What about data? Because like, I think what you consider, you know, we know of I.W. Wells as a reference in her use of data, for instance, to launch a national campaign against lynching in the late 19th century. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on data and how how are being used, and also the fact that, you know, we repeat so much that we live in a post-truth reality where people choose their truth according to the personal bias, but data is such a powerful tool, right, that I don't know really how we can seize, to be honest.
Yeah. You know, so I'll start by saying, like, data is not neutral. It's not neutral just because you got some, like, when people say, oh, this is just the data, it's the hard code fact. No. It is it's everything about data is how people use it, and what they do with it, and what kind of power the people who have it have, and how it's deployed. All of that matters. And we're in a moment, and it's not just right now, for the past at least decade, we're in 2020, so several decades at this point, where massive amounts of data have been collected about us.
Right.
Massive amounts that track our behaviors, track our desires, track our health, all of these things. And that's information about who that reflects part of who we are, but not all that we are. And I think of, during the what years, the late 60s, 70s, the amount of surveillance that local police stations and also the FBI and also the CIA, I'm not sure, but the FBI, COINTELPRO, for sure, the level of surveillance that they enacted on Black people who are Black revolutionaries, Black radicals, and they were just using phones.
Right.
It was just phones, being able to tap into phones and using long range devices so that they could hear conversations. They didn't have the internet and they were able to do it. So I think we should always assume that the state and corporations are conspiring, are actively working towards ways to surveil us, and that they will always be constant. And so accepting that as a part of our reality, and that while the technology may change, the intention is always been there. It's always been there. And so we should do our work accordingly.
Right. Yeah, there's proof of it over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So just to finish talking about the future, before moving on to the questions, I'm curious, since you mentioned the Afrofuturists in passing in Unapologetic, I just love them, their thought, and the creativity that comes out of the movement. Do you take any inspiration from Afrofuturist activists? Like, I'm thinking Walida Nurisha, Adrienne Marie Brown, Rashida Phillips, because they fuse their work with creativity and at the same time social campaigning for housing justice and economic and environmental justice,
Absolutely. I think it was Adrienne Marie Brown who said, like, organizing is science fiction.
Yeah.
Just like science fiction. And I'm a sci-fi lover. I love it. Oh, I love it. I haven't written any yet. I'm not there yet. Like, I haven't skilled up enough to write sci-fi yet. But there's a long tradition of speculative fiction in the Black radical tradition. Mm-hmm. Very, very, very long. And, Black folks, and now today we call it Afrofuturism. It's been called, freedom dreaming before. Right. People, I wish I could remember the name of this person right now, who wrote about what life would be like post chattel slavery, post the transatlantic slave trade. Oh. And was writing about this during, while it was still legal to own people here in the United States, own Black people in particular. And if they could do that then, while Black folks are legally, the majority of Black people living in the United States at that time, and Black people living in the Western Hemisphere and the Caribbean and Central South America, all of those parts were considered, could be property of other people. Mm-hmm. I mean, why can't we do that now? We're in a different situation. It's a different situation. I am not enslaved in the ways that my ancestors were enslaved. I'm not even going to try to play those games and act like everything is the same, because it's not. But it's absolutely connected. And so, yeah, I believe in it. It's a part of our freedom dreaming and us talking about what is possible.
Yeah, a lot of the sci-fi ancestry can be tracked thanks to the work of Cherie Renee Thomas, who is awesome. And she's actually guest of honor at WisCon next year. So maybe we can go.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. Anyway, so I think it's a good time to move on to the public's questions. Oh, wow. Okay. There are a few. Let's see. It's in English. Great. So the first question from Estíbaliz de Miguel on Twitter. Mm-hmm. She said, can you speak about the process of writing and the need of self-validation in this process? As a university teacher, I'm trying to encourage students from disadvantaged backgrounds, working class, women, disabled, to write grounded on their experience and validated.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question. the first thing a question I have is, what are they reading? You know, who and what are they reading? If they are reading things from and by people who are reflective of their experiences, then they can see that it's possible. But if they are only reading things from people who are white, cisgender, men, who are not disabled, who are upper class or come from otherwise economically privileged and economic power, then they're not going to see themselves in it. So I totally believe that one major thing that all scholars must do who are teaching and are responsible for the education of other people is to be clear, like to look at who they're teaching, what are their sources, and including what they're reading, but also what are they watching. There are lots of documentaries, videos, movies, who are the artists that people are looking at, taking a really solid look at who's on your syllabus and switching that up. And it is validated for me. So many things were validated because I saw someone else do it. I saw the possibilities and lifting that up. Yeah.
She has a follow-up question. She says, and I wonder about your position on carceral abolition and alternatives to dealing with violence as a Black young feminist.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so I talked about this on Twitter the other day, is that I didn't always think that policing and prisons and jails and states, I'll say those three things, were like inherently the wrong way to deal with conflict, violence, and harm. I didn't always think that. I was introduced to the concept of prison abolition of the prison industrial complex in 2013. Mm-hmm. And the first person I heard talk about it was Asha Ransby-Sporn. And I was like, what is this? I hadn't even heard of it. I didn't know about it. I didn't know about critical resistance, which folks should totally check out. I didn't know about Insight, Women of Color Against Violence. I hadn't heard of their work. And so for me, I'm on a journey, and I'm at a place where I'm clear that in the United States, that our means of dealing with conflict, violence, and harm through the carceral system, which includes policing, jails, prisons, surveillance, bail bonds, all of this whole entanglement of things, are not pathways to safety or liberation. And that as an abolitionist, my work is about being a part of collective efforts, and even in my everyday life, to create alternatives and different systems and different ways of relating with each other and different ways of dealing with conflict, harm, and violence. And so that has taken personal experiences, reading, conversations, lots of self-reflection, and also listening to people who are already doing it. Like, abolition is not, it is a long-term campaign, absolutely. And it is not something that doesn't exist anywhere. Like, it exists in places. There are projects, there are efforts towards it. And again, I'm talking about this primarily from a US centric perspective. I can't speak to it in the same way globally as I can from my experiences and my knowledge, not even just my personal experiences, but my own research and study. And it has everything to do with our relationship to the state and our relationship to property. Right now, some people are up in arms because a Target, protesters liberated goods from a Target in Minneapolis last night, expressing their rage of the killing of Mr. Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer, Minneapolis Police Department officer. And so people care a lot about property in this country. And many people with power and people without institutional power. And for me, I care much more about people than I do about property, especially being a descendant of people who were considered property in this country for hundreds of years. So for me, abolition is a journey just as internally as much as it is out in the world as a movement.
Thank you. There are two questions. Well, the first question from John Bernaola, I think he's asking for you to comment on your idea of collective punishment that you speak about in Unapologetic when you refer to Palestine.
Mm-hmm. So I was I had the opportunity and the gift to visit Palestine with a delegation that was led by Ahmed Abu Snaid and Dr. Beta Al-Hassan and the Dream Defenders. And while there, I think that, I don't know if that was the first time I heard the phrase collective punishment. It was the first time that I thought about it in any real way. And people use the phrase over and over again. And it is about, I wish I had it open in my book. But collective punishment is about, enacting tools and systems of surveillance, dominance, genocide, control over a group of people, no matter what they do. And it doesn't matter any particular actions that they have made or anything like that. That you still have to contend. You still have to contend with these things. And so in Palestine, the example there, of course, is the apartheid that people are experiencing, the segregation walls, the violence, be it in Gaza and parts of across the West Bank. And the fact that scores of people across the Palestinian diaspora are unable to return home. And I believe that we just observed, was it the 75th? This was I don't know if it was the 75th anniversary of the Nakba. I don't want to get the year wrong, but the beginning of the forced removal of Palestinians from their land. And so I then, in the process of writing this book, wanted to think about how collective punishment tracks with Black people here in the US and globally. And interestingly enough, there's actually, even in the 1949 Geneva Convention, they talk about collective punishment in the time of war and how people have to, saying that people should not actually have to be punished for something that they haven't personally committed. But the reality is that for oppressed people across the world, collective punishment is a reality. We see it in the criminalization of sex workers here in the US. We see it in the criminalization of sex workers in South Africa. I know that there's an organization, Sweat, in South Africa that focuses on the decriminalization of sex workers there. The comrade of mine leads it. And we see collective punishment even right now in Chicago and New York City, where we're seeing these numbers of people, the people who are arrested for being outside and not socially distancing, are mostly Black people and brown people. While we know that white people are also, I've seen it with my own eyes, out there with no mask on, just getting their entire lives, and they are not arrested. And so collective punishment is absolutely connected to criminalization. And it's even we see it on large levels enacted by states and things that become law in everyday practice.
It's the same over here, by the way. With the, anyway. So a second question by John Bernaola is, he would like to know your opinion about, and I quote, Chinese behavior towards Africans lately.
I think what this person is referring to is perhaps the reports that I've seen about Africans in China being pushed out or barred. And what I will say about that is what I'll say about anti-Blackness anywhere, is that it is not just about what's happening in this particular moment. But I remember being in Hong Kong some years ago and witnessing some of the conditions in which African migrants live within, and other, frankly, non-Chinese migrants live within in Hong Kong, which I know is not the same as China and its complicated relationship, all of those things. But it's connected to anti-Blackness as a global reality. And also connected to like how migrants are treated, right? How people migrants and immigrants are treated across this world. And we should always ask, how did people land in this place and how are they treated? And how do other people, because there are expats from the United States who live in China and Hong Kong, and I doubt that they're being pushed out, who are white. I doubt that they're going to be pushed out. So, and I'm happy to be proven wrong on that. I don't think people should be getting pushed out, period, frankly, in these situations. Yeah. I think it's all connected. So that's the most I can say, because I don't know everything that has happened there.
So Estivalis de Miguel, who asked you the questions before, she's thanking you for your answers, and she would like to know examples and references for reading.
Yes. So as Arrate mentioned earlier, there are a lot of references in the book, things and people to read. But Angela Davis's "Are Prisons Obsolete" is one that I always recommend. It's about that big. I don't know if it's been translated. I do know that
you said
"Are Prisons Obsolete." I'm not sure.
I don't know, actually.
It should be. It should be translated if it hasn't been. And that's by Angela Davis. I also highly suggest Arrested Justice by Beth E. Ritchie. What else? There's so many books. Andrea Ritchie's book as well is an important book to read. And these are all books about policing and imprisonment. And Andrea's book, I'm going to get in trouble for not having the title of Andrea's book at the top of my mind, because I actually wrote the afterword for Andrea's book. I'm like, I don't want to get it wrong. Is Invisible No More: Police Violence Against Black Women and Women of Color. Andrea, don't hate me for not knowing that. But I wrote the afterword for that book.
Sure.
Another important one to read, Barbara Ramsey's book on Ella Baker. What I'm actually interested in is things that were not written in the United States. You know, I want to know more of those things. You know, I know the stuff that's here, but I don't know as much about what's coming out of other places. And I mean, there's so many people that I just love to read. I usually put them on my Instagram and my Twitter, in my Facebook. I'm reading Saidiya Hartman's Wayward Lives and Beautiful. I just read Saidiya Hartman's Wayward Lives and Beautiful Experiments. There's just so much out there.
I know, right?
Yeah.
We need so many lives. Like,
yeah.
Just me to stay at home and read.
Right.
On that note, I actually had one final question from myself, which is related to you quoting Toni Morrison, saying if there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. And I wanted to know what books or books that don't exist yet you would like to read. Yeah.
Well, I'm writing one. The novel that I'm working on is about, it's a Black family epic. It's in Chicago that spans like 4 decades. And it's working to tell more complete stories about Black women and Black families across a number of external and internal conflicts, from like the Vietnam War to the HIV and AIDS epidemic here in Chicago. Right. And so I feel like that's a story that hasn't been told in the way I'm going to tell it. And hasn't been told in more ways than one. And I decided to tell it through fiction because I don't think I'm really interested in reaching people in multiple ways. And so that's one thing that I want to say before I'm writing it. The other things that I'm interested in, are stories about and for Black, queer, and trans folks that illustrate the kind of world that we want to live in from our perspectives. And because there's so many different perspectives. I want to see a book that is transnational from Black perspectives and Black radical and leftist perspectives on where the world should go next. One that isn't just the usual suspects. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Well, that's it from everyone. So thank you so much again. It's been such a great conversation.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm thankful for all of this, for your book, for the opportunity to translate it. And Estival de Miguel is just telling us that abolition democracy has been translated. So that's one good thing.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So thanks so much.
Good. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. And of course, thank you, Radical May, for the opportunity to be here today.
What's left of it?
Como acabaram de ouvir, tudo mudou.